Today, October 16th, the numbers that emerged from Moscow's Ministry of Economic Development sent a chill even through seasoned analysts. Russia's economy, according to the latest confidential report obtained by our sources, is entering what experts quietly describe as a freefall scenario. Inflation has accelerated far beyond official projections, regional budgets are collapsing, and behind closed doors, even state corporations admit that liquidity reserves are melting faster than anticipated. What makes the situation especially alarming is not only the pace of decline, but the deliberate silence surrounding it. For months, officials assured the public that the financial system remained stable and adaptive. Yet inside the ministries, the tone has shifted to one of controlled panic. The ruble's recent fluctuations are only the visible surface of a much deeper structural fracture that began long before the sanctions of 2022, but has now reached a critical phase. At first glance, the figures published by Rosstat seem manageable. A modest GDP contraction, a few percentage points of inflation, nothing catastrophic. But off the record, insiders admit that the data is being adjusted through complex statistical smoothing to mask the real depth of the recession. Several regions, especially those dependent on federal subsidies, are already defaulting on internal obligations. Teachers and doctors in small towns are reporting delays in salary payments for the first time since 2015. The Ministry of Finance calls these temporary difficulties. Yet, in reality, it's the early sign of systemic insolvency. What's worse, central authorities are trying to plug these holes by printing more rubles under the guise of targeted stimulus. That, in turn, fuels further inflation, a spiral no one knows how to stop. However, the most unsettling signal came not from Moscow, but from Yekaterinburg. Local industrial managers there reportedly received secret instructions to reduce production quotas due to logistical uncertainty. The euphemism hides a darker truth. Supply chains for critical components are collapsing. Warehouses are emptying, spare parts are unavailable, and imported technologies once crucial to entire sectors have become inaccessible. Officially, this is described as a period of technological reorientation, but in expert circles it is already being called the silent deindustrialization. Even large enterprises, once proud symbols of post-Soviet recovery, now operate at half capacity, burning through reserves while pretending to maintain stability. Behind the scenes, conversations in government offices are increasingly tense. According to our information, one of the deputy ministers recently warned in a closed session that the next 6 months will determine whether we have an economy at all. The phrase was quickly deleted from the meeting transcript, but its echo spread through the corridors. The Kremlin is still trying to project confidence, insisting that the pivot to Asia will solve everything. But business circles privately admit that even this lifeline is weakening. Chinese partners are demanding hard currency payments and higher collateral, while India is quietly freezing several joint projects. The much-touted economic sovereignty is turning into isolation. For those who still follow the slow-motion collapse from within, the sense of déjà vu is haunting. It feels like the late 1980s again, when the numbers were optimistic, but the shelves were already empty. Yet this time, the collapse won't be ideological. It will be purely economic, cold and mechanical, without slogans or rallies. Many prefer not to see it, clinging to illusions of stability, but the reality is shifting beneath their feet. And those who observe it closely, economists, traders, regional officials, quietly confess that the bottom may not even be visible yet. In such moments, it becomes more important than ever to follow reliable analysis, not propaganda. Those who understand how the Russian economy is truly changing, who connect these fragments into a coherent picture, will be better prepared for what's coming. Subscribe, stay with us, and see how this story unfolds, because what lies ahead may redefine everything we thought we knew about power, money, and survival in modern Russia. The first clear signal that something had gone irreversibly wrong came from within the banking sector. On the morning of October 16th, several regional banks quietly froze corporate accounts, citing technical maintenance. By evening, it became evident that the maintenance was, in fact, a liquidity crisis. Transactions were delayed for hours, and at least 2 mid-sized financial institutions halted withdrawals altogether. Officially, the central bank denied any systemic issues, releasing a brief statement about temporary disruptions. Yet, according to our contacts in the financial community, the panic behind closed doors was palpable. Some institutions are reportedly unable to meet currency conversion requests, while others have begun rationing access to foreign reserves. It's a silent bank run, one that the state cannot publicly acknowledge without triggering a much larger collapse. At the same time, an unusual development unfolded in the corridors of large state enterprises. In several industrial conglomerates, including those tied to the defense sector, payrolls were suddenly delayed by administrative reasons. Insiders confirm that funds simply didn't arrive from the Treasury in time. For a system that prides itself on discipline and predictability, this is a serious alarm. Employees are still being urged not to discuss the problem publicly, but the situation is spreading. Behind the facade of stability, the bureaucratic machine is grinding to a halt. Even strategic factories are operating with minimal staff to save electricity and materials. The illusion of continuous production, sustained for propaganda purposes, is cracking. And for those who have watched the Russian economic model evolve over the last decade, this moment feels eerily inevitable. The external picture remains deceptively calm. Energy exports, though reduced, still generate revenue. The ruble fluctuates but never fully collapses. The government points to these indicators as proof that the system adapts to challenges. But in reality, experts say, these are the last flickers of inertia from a model built on extraction and control. Once the pipeline contracts dry up, there's little left to sustain the illusion. According to internal projections from the Ministry of Energy, data never meant to be public, oil output is expected to drop by nearly 20% next year due to a shortage of replacement equipment. Sanctions have cut off the flow of critical technology, and domestic substitutes remain on the level of the late 1990s. The government is aware of this, yet continues to issue statements about innovation sovereignty. It's a phrase that has lost all meaning, repeated now mostly to reassure the leadership itself. Meanwhile, ordinary Russians are beginning to feel the effects in their daily lives. Prices for basic food items, grain, sugar, and cooking oil, have risen sharply since summer. The official inflation rate lags far behind reality, and supermarkets quietly replace imported goods with lower-quality domestic copies. In Moscow, shelves still appear full, but in smaller towns, the shortages are becoming visible again. Medicine is another silent crisis. Pharmacies are running out of key imported drugs, while domestic producers fail to meet safety standards. Parents of sick children are turning to underground telegram channels, where imported medicine is sold at prices 10 times higher than official retail. The state calls this temporary turbulence, but among the population, the word deficit has returned to everyday vocabulary. A ghost of the Soviet past resurrected in modern form, and yet, in a paradoxical twist, the government's propaganda machine continues to broadcast optimism. State television reports steady growth and unprecedented resilience, showing smiling factory workers and graphs pointing upward. But the people on those screens are the same workers whose shifts have been shortened, whose wages are delayed, whose factories are quietly being dismantled for spare parts. It's a simulation of prosperity built on fear of admitting collapse. The deeper the crisis grows, the louder the official optimism becomes, as if words could replace money or slogans could stabilize an empty market. Still, the most revealing change is not in the economy itself, but in the faces of those who used to believe in it. Business owners, bureaucrats, analysts, many of them now whisper the same question: how long can this fiction hold? No one answers aloud, everyone knows the answer already, but the silence is strategic, an instinct for survival. For now, they nod, they comply, they repeat the official line. Yet behind that silence, something else is forming. A quiet understanding that the old system has reached its limit. And the next wave, experts warn, won't be financial. It will be political. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly. A change in tone within the upper levels of government. Insiders say that during a recent closed meeting, one senior official asked a question that froze the room. What if stabilization is no longer possible? For years, the leadership treated the economy as a controllable mechanism, one that could be tuned with decrees and oil prices. But in the past few weeks, that illusion has cracked. Internal memos now circulate under coded headings, warning of socioeconomic fatigue. That phrase, bureaucratic and sterile, hides a more dangerous truth. The state is running out of tools to maintain control. Even loyal ministers, once confident in Moscow's economic playbook, have begun to admit privately that the model built on centralization and endless resource extraction has reached its terminal stage. Behind official optimism, a different story is unfolding. By mid-October, the volume of foreign currency transactions through Russia's remaining international channels dropped by nearly 40%. The reason, according to multiple financial sources, is not external pressure. It's internal distrust. Businesses, fearing sudden regulation or confiscation, are withdrawing assets abroad through informal routes. Even those who once publicly praised economic sovereignty are moving their capital to Dubai, Istanbul, or Hong Kong. The contradiction is striking. As state media speaks of patriotic resilience, the country's own elite are quietly dismantling its financial foundation. But in Russia's current climate, silence has become the only form of self-preservation. Ordinary citizens sense this contradiction even without access to inside data. The streets of large cities are still full, the cafes open, the advertisements bright, but there's a subtle heaviness in the air, a feeling that everything is staged. People continue to spend, but only because they no longer trust the ruble to hold value. Consumer demand remains artificially high, driven not by confidence, but by fear. As one economist put it off the record, people are buying refrigerators not because they need them, but because they expect tomorrow's prices to be worse. It's the psychology of collapse repeating itself, a familiar rhythm from the late Soviet years, now reborn in digital form. Meanwhile, in the corridors of the central bank, the atmosphere borders on despair. According to insiders, the regulator has exhausted most of its reserve mechanisms. Currency interventions are limited, interest rate hikes are no longer effective, and attempts to attract foreign investment through friendly nations have stalled. Chinese and Turkish lenders, once willing to cooperate, now quietly step back, wary of secondary sanctions and the growing unpredictability of Russian policy. In this context, the government's promises to maintain stability sound increasingly hollow. The real question circulating among financial experts isn't whether the ruble will fall again. It's how far it can fall before the system breaks completely. But perhaps the most unsettling shift is happening not in finance or industry, but in mindset. The idea of stability, once the core of Russian political identity, is dissolving. For years, it was the unspoken contract between state and society. Accept limited freedoms in exchange for economic security. Now that security is evaporating, people who once ignored politics are beginning to ask uncomfortable questions. Small protests, mostly local and uncoordinated, are being reported in several regions. Nothing dramatic yet, but enough to make regional authorities nervous. Each small delay in salary, each empty shelf, each failed payment accumulates like pressure beneath a surface that looks calm only from afar. The Kremlin understands this perfectly. The question is whether it still has the means to contain it. However, amid all this uncertainty, a new kind of conversation is beginning to emerge. Analysts who once worked in state institutions are now appearing on independent platforms under pseudonyms, sharing data that contradicts the official narrative. Their tone is restrained, professional, but their conclusions are devastating. They speak of structural irreversibility, of an economy that has crossed the point where traditional measures can save it. They warn that the next crisis won't be a financial crash in the usual sense. It will be an erosion of trust so deep that no monetary intervention can repair it. This realization, though still whispered, is spreading fast. Even within the establishment, there's a sense that something fundamental is slipping away. The system no longer reacts to commands, said one former ministry advisor. It just drifts. And for those watching closely, that drift feels less like a transition and more like the beginning of an ending. That's why it's crucial now, more than ever, to stay connected to independent analysis. The official picture will keep showing stability, but behind it, the real story is unfolding. Quietly, inevitably. Subscribe and stay with us, because in the coming weeks, what's happening beneath the surface may prove far more consequential than anything said from the podium. By October 16th, the atmosphere in Moscow had changed. Conversations in cafes, offices, and even among government staff became noticeably quieter. The city still functioned, lights on, traffic dense, shops open. But it all felt strangely weightless, like a film set after the actors have gone home. According to several business insiders, the latest directive from the Kremlin ordered regional administrations to avoid the language of crisis. Governors were instructed to use the term temporary adjustments instead of recession and to emphasize growth potential, even when reporting production cuts. But these linguistic tricks no longer fooled anyone. People understood what was happening, even if no one dared to name it. What was once a controlled narrative has turned into a collective act of denial, a ritualized repetition of words that no longer correspond to reality. In this carefully maintained silence, another story began to unfold, one involving the country's wealthiest elite. Several oligarchs, once symbols of the Kremlin's loyalty system, have reportedly started moving their families and assets abroad under the guise of medical treatment or education needs. It's a pattern that recalls the exodus of the early 1990s, though this time it's happening quietly, without headlines. Their departure signals something deeper than personal fear. It's an instinctive recognition that the center is losing control, that the machinery of the state can no longer protect its own. Even officials close to the presidential administration privately admit that the recent emergency stabilization meetings have failed to produce concrete results. One participant described them as endless discussions about numbers that no longer matter. Meanwhile, the regional situation grows more unstable by the day. In Siberia and the Far East, local administrations are struggling to maintain fuel supplies before winter. Railway deliveries are delayed, storage facilities are emptying, and officials have begun rationing diesel for emergency services. In some districts, power outages have become routine, a few hours one day, half a night the next. Officially, these blackouts are blamed on maintenance work. Unofficially, they are the direct result of resource shortages and unpaid contractors. The feeling of controlled decay is spreading. Those who lived through the late Soviet years recognize the signs instantly: delays, denials, and the slow disappearance of normalcy. Only this time, the decay is unfolding in real time, documented online, shared across social networks, impossible to hide completely. However, what truly frightens the establishment is not the economic data or the shortages. It's the loss of belief. For 2 decades, the Russian system was built on a paradoxical foundation, a mixture of fear and faith. Fear of instability kept people obedient. Faith in the state's endurance kept them calm. Now both pillars are crumbling. The fear is still there, but it no longer commands respect, only resentment. And the faith, once so central to national identity, has been replaced by quiet cynicism. People continue to work, to survive, to adapt, but not to believe. They've stopped listening, a political technologist reportedly said, after reviewing recent social sentiment reports. The TV no longer works. It wasn't about electricity, it was about authority. In response, the Kremlin has doubled down on control. New regulations tighten the internet, fresh restrictions limit economic reporting, and several prominent analysts have been summoned for informational clarification. Yet these actions only deepen the sense of desperation. The state still acts as if the crisis can be managed through censorship and decree, while the foundations beneath it continue to erode. Even within the Siloviki circles, once the most loyal segment of power, there's growing frustration. Many understand that enforcing order over a collapsing economy is like guarding the ruins of a house still pretending to stand. The tools of fear remain, but the system that sustained them is fading. Still, amid the uncertainty, something unexpected is happening. In private conversations among economists and mid-level bureaucrats, people are beginning to speak more freely than before. Cautiously, in whispers, but openly. They discuss alternatives, new models, new alliances, even the possibility of political transition. No one knows what that might look like, or who could lead it. But the very act of imagining it marks a shift. It's as if the collapse, while terrifying, has also broken a spell. The idea that nothing can change, once the cornerstone of modern Russian thinking, is weakening. For the first time in years, the silence feels less like submission and more like the moment before speech. And yet, those who understand history know that such moments are volatile. They can lead to renewal or to chaos. The next moves, both inside and outside the Kremlin, will determine which path Russia follows. But one thing is clear: the illusion of control has ended. What comes next will no longer be managed. It will be real. By the night of October 16th, Moscow no longer felt like a city that believed its own stability. Lights burned bright along the embankments. Cars moved as usual. Yet behind those glowing windows, something had shifted. Inside ministries and financial departments, reports marked for internal use only circulated faster than ever. According to our sources, one document from the Ministry of Finance used a phrase that has not appeared in official language for decades: loss of control over monetary circulation. It was a quiet admission that the tools no longer worked. Inflation is rising faster than predicted. The ruble keeps slipping despite interventions, and even key banks are showing signs of exhaustion. For years, the government managed to simulate balance. Now that simulation is breaking apart in real time, across the regions, the collapse has taken on a more human shape. In the industrial cities of the Urals, factories are cutting work weeks to 3 or even 2 days. Workers are officially retained, but paid only partial wages. In Siberia, heating season is starting with delayed fuel deliveries and blackouts that authorities blame on technical recalibration. The euphemisms no longer hide the truth. The economy is shrinking from within. Officials still insist that the system is adapting, yet those who see the numbers know that adaptation has already turned into survival. Everything looks calm on paper, one economic consultant told us, but only because the paper is thicker than reality. At the same time, the atmosphere among the elite is turning brittle. Meetings once filled with slogans now feel like confession sessions. Some high-ranking figures are quietly seeking guarantees abroad: property, residency, foreign accounts, hedging against what they privately call the phase of uncertainty. Even among state corporations, the language has changed. Instead of talking about growth, directors now discuss preservation of capacity. The shift may sound technical, but it reveals a new mindset. The goal is no longer to advance, but simply to endure. What was once pride in national strength is becoming the fear of losing what remains. Meanwhile, society drifts into a kind of suspended awareness. People know that something is breaking, but no one knows where or when the fracture will show. Prices rise, wages stagnate, shortages spread, yet the daily routine continues, as if inertia alone could hold the country together. In expert circles, this moment is being called the plateau before the fall. It's the illusion of balance that precedes a sharper descent. For the first time in years, even loyal voices on state television sound unsure. Their optimism feels rehearsed, their pauses too long. The mask of stability is still there, but beneath it, fatigue and something close to fear. And as October 16th draws to a close, the unspoken truth becomes harder to avoid. The system has entered a stage it can neither reverse nor explain. Every new decree only deepens the contradiction. Every reassurance sounds thinner than the last. Experts describe this as structural silence, when the facts are known but cannot be said aloud. Yet silence has its own momentum. It grows, it spreads, it fills every room until words lose meaning. And that's where Russia stands tonight, between the official narrative and the visible collapse, between illusion and awakening. The real question is what will follow when the silence breaks, because sooner or later, it always does. Stay with us, subscribe, and watch closely. The turning point has already begun, and by the time it becomes visible to everyone, it may be far too late to pretend nothing has changed.